Unit 2, Lesson 1, Personality Viewpoints. The Unit 2, Lesson 1, Vocabulary. After this presentation, we should be able to define what personality is, identify the three separate but related levels personality is divided into, understand personality structure, recognize the 5 viewpoints to study personality. Defining sport personality. Sport and exercise psychologists identify principles and guidelines that professionals can use to help adults and children participate in and benefit from sport and exercise activities. Personality is the sum of the characteristics that make a person unique. The study of personality helps us work better with students, athletes, patients, and exercisers, and work more effectively with coworkers. Personality is divided into 3 separate but related levels. The base has a psychological core. The middle section is the typical responses, or like learned behaviors. And then the top part of the personality structure is the role-related behavior. Now, each of these 3 levels can be determined by either external or internal factors and by constant or dynamic factors in our social environment. Now we're going to learn about them in more depth. The most basic level of personality is the psychological core. This is the deepest component of an individual. It includes our attitudes, our values, our interests, our motives, and our beliefs about ourselves and our self-worth. The psychological core represents the centerpiece of your individual personality. It's the real you, deep within. Typical responses are the ways we learn to adjust to the environment. This section is entirely dependent on the situation, the company, like the people around us, and the place. Introverts act differently than would extroverts. Happy people act differently than angry people. Even-tempered, mild-mannered people act differently than those who are hot-tempered. Family would act differently than your friends would. You act differently at school than you do at home. The typical responses and the ways that we learn to adjust to our environment are dependent on the environment. Role-related behavior is how we act based on what your perceived social situation is. This is the most changeable aspect of personality because behavior changes with our perceptions of the environment when different situations require different roles. So you could be like me, a teacher on one hand, a father. I'm also a student. I'm a husband, a friend, a coach. I'm a son to my parents. I was a brother to my brother and sister. Or I am a brother, sorry. Each role takes on a different side of one's personality. So role-related behavior is how we act based on those different situations. We can act differently in our classroom setting than we would on the field setting, than we would in a personal setting at a dinner with friends or going to watch a movie. The 3 levels of personality encompass a continuum from internally driven to externally driven behaviors. Compare our levels of personality to a chocolate-covered banana. Everyone sees the outside toppings. Our role-related behaviors go one step deeper, and we expose a bit more of our personality through the typical responses we provide on a daily basis. And it's more easily seen, like the chocolate in the picture, on the bananas. Finally, the hardest layer of our personality for others to get to know often is the very basis of who we are, the banana. The psychological core at the heart of us. The banana is who we are. The rest is toppings and added flavor. At our core, we are what we are. And in this example, we are the banana. Psychologists have looked at personality from several viewpoints. Five of the major ways of studying personality in sport and exercise have been called the psychodynamic approach, the trait approach, the situational approach, the interactional approach, and the phenomenological approach. We'll begin with the psychodynamic approach, which views personality as a dynamic set of processes that constantly change and are often in conflict with one another. This is characterized by two main themes. First is that it places an emphasis on unconscious determinants of behavior, that is, things that happen that we can't control. Second, it focuses on understanding the person as a whole rather than identifying isolated traits or dispositions. Like, just because a person gets angry or has an angry outburst, it doesn't mean they're a naturally or normally angry person. They just might have had an episode of anger. The psychodynamic approach was made popular by renowned psychologist Sigmund Freud. The trait approach, on the other hand, assumes that the fundamental units of personality, its traits, that they're relatively stable and that the personality traits are enduring and consistent regardless of situation. The causes of behavior reside within each person, and that the situational or environmental factors are somewhat minimal. These traits are considered to force a person to likely act in a certain way, but not always though. The trait approach focuses on the Big Five model of personality. And the Big Five are openness, extroverted, conscientious, stable, and agreeable. Those are the Big Five personality traits. Situation approach, on the other hand, says that behavior is determined by situation or environment, and not just one or the other. It says that environmental influences and reinforcements shape the way we behave. You could be confident in one situation and tentative in a different situation. You could be confident in one environment or tentative in a different environment. We could be confident around some people and tentative around others. Can you think of a situation where you've been confident one minute and tentative the next? Or how about an environment where you've been confident one day and then tentative the next day? Or how about around certain people where you've been confident around some people and tentative around others? The interactional approach states that a situation and person are equally responsible for their behavior. Personal traits and situational factors independently determine behavior, that they often interact or mix to influence behavior in unique ways. The international approach is favored by a majority of contemporary sport and exercise psychologists because it allows for situations to influence behavior equally as a person's values and beliefs. Because what we feel inside, our values, our core values at our psychological core, can help guide us to situations that give us a chance to succeed and help steer us away from situations that put us in an awkward predicament or that would make us uncomfortable. That is the interactional approach. Get with me now if you can. The phenomenological approach contends that behavior is best determined by accounting for both situations and personal characteristics. It examines a person's understanding and interpretation of themselves and their environment. Not just themselves and not just their environment, but both. Because an individual's subjective experiences and personal views of the world are critical to how they see the world. This is the most popular orientation used today. And not just because it's the hardest to pronounce, but because it really takes into account an individual's upbringing, an individual's belief system, and their environment. Sort of the nature versus nurture section. That we have our inner thoughts and self images and our inner behaviors, our feelings on objects and people, but each of those are affected by our individual motivation and by our environment around us. So, if you were to chart the 5 viewpoints of personality on a spectrum, going from the most internally determined to the most environmentally determined, this is kind of what it would look like. The psychodynamic approach favored by Sigmund Freud says that everything is internally determined. And then it begins to move and shift a little more with a trait viewpoint of personality, that our traits have a bigger say in what's going on. The interactional approach says that everything is equally split between internally and environmentally determination.